Hey, happy Monday. Today is the first day of week 2, and we're going to talk about site ops or site operations. So, one of the first areas of survey compliance is making sure that when the surveyor arrives, everything that they need to see or access is ready to go. And that is kind of what falls into site ops. So, the first day today, we're going to talk about facility or agency and community orientation and education. It's just a simple starting point, and it's involved in the personnel files as well. So we'll roll some of this up into the personnel files on Thursday as well. But agencies are required to provide orientation and education not only to their own agency staff, but also to the community and to contracted partners. As far as hospice is required to provide a facility education annually, an orientation. When they contract with a facility, they're expected to provide hospice education for that facility staff, whoever's going to be caring for the patient. It's the hospice's responsibility to make sure that the facility understands the hospice philosophy. There's a couple requirements in that education requirement. So, depending on your governing body, whoever is overseeing you for survey, you probably want to look up what their education requirements are. That is a COP. So, it's going to be whoever surveys you is going to expect to see that facility education occurred if you're a hospice. So, that includes grief, symptom management, privacy. There's some topics, some very high level topics that they'll expect to see in your orientation. And I would say on that front, don't overcomplicate that. If you're a hospice and you have a partnership with a facility, I think this is a great marketing move that you can use as, hey, we provide this extra training. Here's the information. We can provide it for you. However, if you want to get an in to have a conversation with that facility leadership, this is a great way to do that. Say we'd like to review our orientation and education packet with you, see if you have any questions, and make sure that this is implemented with your staff. It's a requirement. So that is a hospice specific requirement for facility orientation. They also expect to see that you are providing some community education. So they want to see that you're offering hospice related education to the community, including your partnerships, but also just generally providing hospice education about signs and symptoms. You can do this in a way that captures how you establish admission requirements, what hospice benefit is. So those are all things you can roll up into that community education. And I would always capture anything that your marketers are doing in that way, so that you're recording conversations that you have with the hospital or with doctors' offices. Those are all community education. So just keep a log of that. Keep a log of the topic. This can be a very simple lined sheet of paper with the date, the topic, who they talked to, and who did it. So that's it. Now, some of the other education and orientation topics are geared more towards the personnel files, like what they expect to see when they look at the staff orientation and education. And again, some of that may vary from your accrediting body. So generally speaking, CHAP and ACHC, and I would venture to guess also the Joint Commission, will be looking to see that there's a few things as far as orientation that staff receive for any agency. So for home health, hospice, home care, they're going to want to see that an orientation process occurred, that there was a general orientation process, that they were oriented to policies and procedures. My survey that I just got through with ACHC, the sticking point for them was they wanted to see where staff were told in orientation where they could access the policies and procedures, and that staff acknowledged, I was shown policies and procedures and how to access them on this date at this time. And we had to go in and add that to their orientation checklist. I do have a very rough orientation checklist if you need one. I'm happy to send you that. Just let me know if that's a need that you have. You should have some type of written process for orientation for new employees. And that should include going over your agency core values or vision or mission, because that reflects what you're bringing staff members on to do. And then it also should include regulatory items like HIPAA, like, their privacy rights, policies and procedures, conflict of interest, any of those type of legal topics. So they're going to want to see that those are provided to employees during the orientation process. And then they also want to see that there is a hands-on orientation process occurring. So out in the field, they want to see that staff have been trained on their role with a competency performed before they see the patients, and a check off by someone in that role who's designated to do that. And there are certain people for certain disciplines who can do those checkoffs. So like, for example, an aide could not check off an RN. An RN has to check off, an RN or an aide. So that varies some by discipline and by agency and by accrediting body, but not much. In general, you need to have a competency performed on any clinician who is performing in any role. And they do tag for that. That's a very low hanging fruit. And it is something we will cover in more depth in the personnel files, because those evals and competencies are going to come up. And they're an easy way to avoid a tag by making sure those are all up to date. So, standard includes written policies and procedures established and implemented that describe the orientation process. And then documentation will reflect all personnel received in orientation. So it must include the review of the job description and duties, the organizational chart and structure of the agency, the philosophy of the agency, like we talked about, confidentiality, patient rights, how advanced directives are handled, conflict of interest, emergency preparedness. You have to include emergency preparedness in your orientation. You will be tagged if your employees don't know about your emergency preparedness plan. They will ask. It is on the list of surveyor interview questions, which I am compiling a free tool for you guys to hopefully help you do some practice runs with your staff with those surveyor interview questions so they feel comfortable and confident. But more to come in a couple weeks as we get farther into the series. Some other items are any training that's specific to their job, any training for special populations if that applies. So, pediatrics is a good example. Cultural diversity, communication and language barriers, ethical issues, boundaries, QAPI plan and PIPs. That's going to be a part of our conversation later this week about, do your staff know about the QAPI program and an active PIP? Because they should. Conveying charges, how those are conveyed to patients, OSHA, compliance, and then any equipment they may be using in their job, how to report incidents and accidents, grievances, complaints, and, depending on your setting. So for hospice, maybe the HIS surveys or CAP surveys, or if you're in home care, OASIS, how to what OASIS is and why you have to submit that. Those are some questions that they may ask if they were taught in orientation. So those are the general areas. And again, that's a very high level 10-minute overview of orientation and education. So hopefully that was helpful for you. I'll put up a little action plan in the feed to see where you guys are at with that. But if you have any specific questions about that, feel free to drop it in the comments and let me know, and I'll try to answer it for you. Hope that was helpful, and we'll talk again tomorrow about patient materials.